The crowd laughed when the old German shepherd limped onto the auction stage. His fur was patchy, one ear drooped, and his eyes, once proud, were filled with silent pain. "No one wants a broken dog," someone muttered. The auctioneer's voice echoed, "Starting bid, $10. Silence. People looked away, shaking their heads. Minutes passed. The dog lowered his head, accepting his fate. Just when the auctioneer sighed to move on, a quiet voice from the back spoke up. Steady, calm. "I'll take him." Everyone turned. A stranger stood there, hand raised, eyes locked on the trembling dog. No one knew who he was, or why he'd bid on a dog no one wanted. But what followed would leave the entire town speechless. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The wooden barn echoed with voices, laughter, and the restless shuffle of boots on dirt. Dust swirled under the harsh yellow lights as men leaned against the rails, waving their bid cards for animals that promised profit. The air smelled of hay, sweat, and money, the kind of place where lives were traded like tools. The auctioneer's hammer struck the podium with a sharp crack, and the crowd roared again. But when the next cage rolled forward, the noise faltered. Inside stood a German shepherd, limping, thin, with a patch of shaved fur running down his hind leg. One ear drooped and his tail hung low, barely moving. His once bright coat was marred by scars that told a story no one wanted to hear. He blinked slowly at the crowd, confused by the cold eyes staring back at him. The auctioneer hesitated before speaking. Lot number 43, male German shepherd, 5 years old, trained, injured in service. His voice trailed slightly, as if unsure whether to sell or apologize. Starting bid, $10. Silence. A few people shifted uncomfortably. One man whispered, "Poor thing can't even stand right." Another chuckled, "Who'd want a broken dog?" Laughter rippled softly through the barn. The German shepherd lowered his head, his paws trembling slightly under his weight. The auctioneer cleared his throat, pretending not to notice. $10, anyone? Still, no hands rose. The sound of the dog's quiet whine broke the silence like a crack in glass. For a moment, even the laughter stopped. Somewhere in the back, a young boy tugged at his father's sleeve. "Dad, why's nobody helping him?" The father looked away, muttering, "Not our problem." The dog looked around one last time, searching for a familiar face, a hint of kindness, and found none. His ears drooped further. The auctioneer sighed, lifting his gavel again. "All right then, moving on." The sound of the hammer was about to fall, sealing his fate. But in that tense, breathless moment, the story of this forgotten dog was only just beginning. Before the auction barn and the pitying stares, the German shepherd had a name that carried pride. Shadow. He once belonged to the city's K9 unit, a partner to Officer Ryan Cole, a man who trusted him more than anyone else in the world. Together they chased suspects through narrow alleys, found missing children in the woods, and stood side by side through storms, riots, and gunfire. Shadow wasn't just a dog, he was a hero in uniform. One night changed everything. A warehouse fire erupted on the outskirts of town. A child trapped inside, crying for help. The flames licked the sky, smoke choking the air. Ryan tried to hold Shadow back, shouting, "No, boy! It's too dangerous!" But Shadow broke free, darting into the inferno without hesitation. Inside, the heat was unbearable, the floor cracking beneath his paws. Through the smoke, he found the terrified child huddled behind crates. Grabbing the child's sleeve gently with his teeth, Shadow dragged him toward the exit. Just as they reached the doorway, a beam collapsed. Pain seared through his hind leg. Still, he pushed forward, shielding the boy until firefighters pulled them both to safety. Ryan rushed to his side, tears mixing with ash. "You did it, Shadow. You did it." The dog wagged his tail weakly, his body trembling. The injury was severe. Surgery saved his life, but the nerve damage never healed. The department tried rehabilitation, but his limp made him unfit for duty. Weeks later, a quiet decision was made. Retirement. Ryan fought it. "He's not just a dog. He's my partner." But the paperwork was already stamped. Shadow was sent to a public shelter, his records marked, "Injured, not for service." Days turned to weeks, then months. The visits stopped. The crowds passed his kennel without a glance. Each time someone came close, he'd perk up, hoping, waiting, but they always walked away. By the time the shelter put him up for auction, Shadow had learned a cruel truth. Even heroes can be forgotten when their bodies break. The air inside the barn grew heavy as the auctioneer tried once more. $10, anyone? His voice echoed against the wooden walls, desperate now. The German shepherd, Shadow, stood trembling under the flickering lights. His eyes darted toward the crowd, searching for a spark of kindness, but all he found were turned faces and shaking heads. A woman near the front crossed her arms. That poor thing should be put down. It's cruel to keep him alive like that. A man beside her laughed. Can't even fetch a stick without falling over. Waste of money. Their words sliced through the silence like knives. Shadow's tail twitched once, then fell limp again. The auctioneer forced a smile. Come on, folks, he's a trained canine. Used to work with the police. Loyal, disciplined. Yeah, right, someone interrupted. Maybe loyal, but he's broken now. Another voice chimed in. Can't protect anyone like that. Laughter rolled through the barn, mean and careless. Shadow lowered his head, the weight of humiliation pressing down. His front paw shifted uncertainly, the injured leg trembling as if the memory of pain itself was waking up. The noise around him blurred, mocking voices blending into one long, heartless murmur. Near the back, a little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve. Mommy, he looks sad. Can we take him home? The mother shook her head quickly. No, honey. He's hurt. We can't afford to fix a broken dog. The auctioneer sighed, glancing at the clock. All right, last call. $10, anyone? His tone carried the finality of defeat. Shadow whimpered softly in a sound that silenced even the laughter for a moment. His ears flattened as he took a shaky step backward, curling slightly, as if trying to make himself invisible. No one moved. The auctioneer lifted his gavel with a slow, regretful motion. No bids, we'll move to the next lot. And as the crowd turned away, Shadow's eyes dimmed, the last flicker of hope fading like light beneath a closing door. Just as the auctioneer began lowering his gavel, a voice from the back broke the silence. I'll take him. Every head turned. The crowd parted slightly as a man stepped forward, quiet, unassuming, his hands tucked in the pockets of a worn brown jacket. His face was half-shadowed beneath the brim of his cap, but his eyes, they carried a stillness that silenced the whispers. The auctioneer blinked. Sir, you're bidding? The man nodded once. $10. A murmur spread through the barn. Someone snorted. He's serious? For that dog? Another whispered. Must be crazy. But the man ignored them, gazed steady on the trembling German shepherd. The auctioneer hesitated only a moment before striking the podium. Sold for $10. The sound of the gavel echoed like a strange kind of victory. Shadow looked up, startled. His ears flicked forward as if trying to understand what had just happened. The stranger walked toward him slowly, his boots scuffing the dirt floor, every movement calm and deliberate. The closer he came, the quieter the barn grew. Even those who'd laughed earlier fell silent, watching. When the man reached the small enclosure, he stopped and crouched down. His hand rested gently on his knee, palm open, patient. Hey boy, he said softly, voice steady but warm. You don't have to be afraid anymore. Shadow hesitated. His body tensed, then relaxed slightly. Step by step, he inched closer until his nose touched the man's hand. A faint tremor passed through him, not fear, but recognition. The man smiled faintly. You've seen enough pain, haven't you? The dog's eyes softened, tail giving a hesitant wag. For the first time that day, his body stopped shaking. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Shadow leaned his head gently against the stranger's knee, a silent act of trust. The auctioneer looked away, his throat tightening. Sir, name for the record? The man stood, giving a small nod. Daniel, he said simply. Just Daniel. And with that, the forgotten dog finally found someone who saw more than his scars. The barn had emptied out by the time Daniel finished the paperwork. Outside, the air was crisp and smelled faintly of rain. The crowd's laughter and murmurs faded behind him as he led Shadow toward an old pickup truck parked near the fence. The German shepherd limped slightly, each step uncertain, but his leash hung loose. Daniel wasn't pulling. He was guiding. When they reached the truck, Daniel opened the passenger door and crouched beside the dog. Easy boy, he murmured. You're safe now. His voice carried a calm assurance that Shadow hadn't heard in a long time. The dog hesitated, glancing up at him, eyes questioning. Then slowly he climbed into the seat, curling his legs beneath him. Daniel smiled faintly. "Good," he whispered, patting the dog's shoulder. "You've got spirit." For a while neither moved. The rain began to fall softly, tapping against the windshield. Daniel sat quietly, watching the road ahead, while Shadow rested his head on the man's lap, tentative at first, then with full weight, like someone who'd finally decided to trust. When Daniel turned the key, the old engine rumbled to life. The headlights cut through the mist, casting a warm glow over Shadow's scarred face. For the first time since the warehouse fire, the dog's eyes began to close, not from exhaustion, but from peace. As they drove, Daniel reached over, brushing a hand through the shepherd's rough fur. "We're both a little broken, huh?" he said softly. "But maybe that's what makes us fit." Shadow's ear twitched as if he understood. Outside, the countryside blurred past, rain, lights, and quiet fields stretching into the dark. At a red light, Daniel glanced down. The dog was asleep, breathing evenly, his tail giving a faint wag even in dreams. Daniel exhaled, feeling a weight lift from somewhere deep inside. For the first time in years, he wasn't driving alone. As the truck rolled forward into the night, one thing became clear. This wasn't just a rescue. It was the beginning of healing for them both. Daniel's small house sat on the edge of town where the fields met the forest. It wasn't much: chipped paint, squeaky door, a sagging porch that creaked with every step. But it was quiet, and that was all he needed. When he opened the door, Shadow hesitated on the threshold. His paws hovered just above the worn floorboards, uncertain if this new place would bring comfort or more pain. Daniel knelt beside him. "Go on," he said gently. "You're home now." The word home hung softly in the air. Shadow blinked, then took a cautious step inside. The warmth from the small fireplace reached him, and he let out a low sigh, settling near it as though his body finally remembered what safety felt like. Daniel watched him for a long moment. The glow of the fire reflected in his tired eyes that carried their own ghosts. Years ago, Daniel had worn the same uniform Shadow once did. He'd served overseas leading a K-9 named Max, a bold, fearless partner who once saved his life during an ambush. But war took more than it gave. One mission went wrong and Max never came back. The guilt had followed Daniel home like a shadow that wouldn't fade. He'd shut himself away from the world, living in silence, until the day he walked into that auction barn. The moment he saw Shadow's limp, the scars, the hollow look in his eyes, something inside Daniel cracked open. It was as if fate had placed a mirror in front of him. Now, sitting by the fire, Daniel whispered, "Maybe we're both just trying to start over." Shadow's ear twitched, and he shifted closer, resting his head on Daniel's boot. Daniel smiled faintly, a tear glinting in the firelight. "You're not broken," he murmured. "You're just hurt. And hurt can heal." Outside, the wind howled softly through the trees. But inside that small, quiet house, two souls who had lost everything began to find pieces of themselves again. The days that followed moved slowly, the kind of quiet Daniel hadn't felt in years. Each morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains, casting a warm glow on the wooden floor where Shadow slept. At first, the German shepherd startled at every sound: the clatter of dishes, the creak of the floorboards, the slam of a car door outside. His body tensed, his ears twitching, ready to flee. But Daniel never raised his voice, never rushed him. He spoke softly, the way one talks to a friend recovering from something invisible. "Easy, boy," he'd say, holding out a treat. "You're safe here." At first, Shadow kept his distance, watching from across the room. He'd eat only when Daniel wasn't looking, then retreat to his corner again. But patience has a way of mending what time alone cannot. Each day, the distance between them grew smaller, an inch, a step, a quiet trust forming in the space between words. Daniel spent his evenings on the porch, fixing old tools or reading, while Shadow lay beside him, his head resting on Daniel's boots. The limp was still there, but it didn't stop him from following Daniel everywhere. To the garden, the mailbox, even the kitchen, where he'd sit patiently as dinner simmered on the stove. One night, a thunderstorm rolled in, sharp lightning flashing across the sky. Shadow woke with a start, trembling violently, eyes wide with fear. Memories of fire and collapse flooded back. Daniel immediately knelt beside him, wrapping his arms around the dog's shaking body. Hey, it's okay," he whispered. "You're not there anymore." Gradually, the trembling eased, Shadow's breathing slowed. He pressed closer, his heartbeat syncing with Daniel's. That night, for the first time since the war, Daniel slept peacefully too. No nightmares, no ghosts. Just the sound of rain tapping softly on the windows and the steady rhythm of two hearts learning to trust the world again. In the stillness of that small house, healing had truly begun, not in words but in quiet company. It was late evening when the storm rolled in, the kind that drenched the earth in minutes and turned roads into rivers. Thunder cracked across the sky and the wind howled through the trees behind Daniel's house. He stood by the window sipping his coffee, watching the rain pour. Shadow lay near the door, his head resting on his paws, eyes half closed. Then suddenly his ears perked up. His head snapped toward the window. A low growl rumbled in his throat. "What is it, boy?" Daniel asked, setting his cup down. Shadow stood tense, tail stiff. Another sound followed, faint, almost swallowed by the storm. A cry, small, desperate. Before Daniel could react, Shadow limped toward the door, pawing at it urgently. The growl turned into sharp, anxious barks. Daniel's heart kicked. "Someone's out there?" he murmured, already grabbing his coat. When he opened the door, Shadow bolted into the rain, his limp forgotten. "Shadow! Wait!" Daniel shouted, chasing after him through the mud and wind. The storm blurred everything, trees bending, lightning flashing, but Shadow's barks guided him like a beacon. They cut through the chaos until Daniel saw it. An old barn near the edge of the field, its roof half collapsed. Shadow was digging frantically at a pile of debris near the entrance, whimpering between barks. Daniel sprinted over, kneeling beside him. Then he heard it again, a child's cry from beneath the rubble. "Oh my God," Daniel breathed. Together, man and dog tore through the wet boards and dirt. Shadow used his teeth and front paws, ignoring the pain that racked his hind leg. Finally, Daniel pulled away a heavy plank, revealing a terrified little girl clutching a stuffed toy. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now," Daniel said, lifting her into his arms. Shadow circled them, panting, tail wagging weakly despite exhaustion. Daniel looked at him, mud-soaked, trembling but alive with purpose. In that moment, Daniel realized something profound. The dog no one wanted had just saved a life. Again. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the town washed clean under a pale golden sky. News traveled faster than the clouds. The story of a crippled auction dog who had braved a thunderstorm to save a lost little girl. Reporters gathered outside the hospital, cameras flashing as the grateful child hugged her rescuer's muddy fur. Shadow stood beside Daniel, his limp more pronounced now, but his eyes bright with pride. When people realized it was the same dog from the auction, the one they had laughed at, mocked and ignored, silence fell across the crowd. The same auctioneer who'd sold him for $10 stood at the edge of the crowd, hat in hand, unable to meet Daniel's gaze. "I didn't know," he murmured, voice trembling. "I didn't know what kind of heart he had." Daniel shook his head softly. "He always had it. You just didn't look close enough." The little girl's mother approached then, tears streaming down her cheeks. She knelt beside Shadow, running a gentle hand over his fur. "He didn't just save my daughter," she whispered. "He saved me too." For the first time, Shadow didn't flinch from strangers' touch. He simply stood there, calm and dignified, as people stepped forward one by one, to pet him, to thank him, to see him. The same townsfolk who'd once turned their backs now offered treats, blankets, even donations to help with his medical care. The local paper ran the headline the next day, "Broken Dog Becomes Hero, the Heart of Shadow." That afternoon, the auctioneer visited Daniel's house. He brought a small box wrapped in twine, Shadow's old police badge found in the records. "He deserves this," the man said quietly. "We all owe him that much." Daniel took it with tears in his eyes, fastening it gently to Shadow's collar. The metal gleamed in the sunlight, a symbol restored. For the first time in years, Shadow stood tall, chest lifted, tail wagging proudly, the town's once-forgotten dog, now its greatest hero. The evening sun bathed Daniel's small house in hues of orange and gold. The storm damage had been cleared, the air smelled of rain-soaked earth, and everything felt quieter, softer somehow. Shadow lay on the porch beside Daniel's chair, his head resting on his paws, the faint glimmer of his old police badge shining on his collar. Daniel rocked slowly, sipping his coffee, eyes on the horizon. You've done more than most men I've known, he said quietly. Shadow's ear flicked as if he understood. The town still buzzed with talk of the rescue. Children passed by after school, waving and calling his name. Neighbors stopped to leave treats on the fence post or drop off letters addressed simply to the hero dog. But Daniel didn't care about the attention. What mattered was the peace that had returned to both their lives. As dusk deepened, Daniel glanced down at Shadow, who was gazing toward the field where lightning had once split the sky. His limp was still there, but now it carried no shame. It was a mark of survival, proof that even the broken can stand tall when love gives them a reason. You weren't broken, Daniel murmured, reaching down to scratch behind his ear. You just needed someone to believe in you. Shadow let out a low, contented groan, rolling slightly to press against Daniel's boots. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint echo of laughter from the distant town. Somewhere a church bell rang. Shadow's eyes closed slowly, his breathing even and calm. Daniel smiled, a real unguarded smile, for the first time in years. He leaned back in his chair, watching the last rays of sunlight fade across the hills. We made it, boy, he whispered. Both of us. As night settled in, the fireflies began to glow, tiny stars in the grass. Shadow stirred once, his tail tapping softly against the porch floor. And there, under the quiet blanket of twilight, two souls, once forgotten, once broken, finally found their peace. Or sometimes, the world doesn't need perfect heroes, just hearts that refuse to give up.